Margaret had always believed in love through sacrifice. She gave everything she had, and then some, to raise her 3 children alone. When her husband Robert died suddenly in a car crash, she didn't have time to mourn. Their youngest, Josh, was barely 5. Sarah, the eldest, was in high school and already acting strong, but Margaret knew she was just pretending. And David, the middle child, had started withdrawing in silence. She stepped into the role of mother and father, took double shifts at the hospital as a night nurse, gave up on ever remarrying, said no to vacations, new clothes, or personal indulgences. Her life revolved around her children's school fees, their meals, their moods. She cooked their favorite meals even after a 16-hour shift. She cheered them on at every parent-teacher meeting and never missed a sports game, even when she had a fever. They grew up knowing only one thing: their mother would always be there. Always. And she was. Years passed. The kids graduated, moved out, built families, chased careers. Margaret felt proud. Her sacrifices hadn't gone to waste. She'd done it, raised 3 capable, independent adults. At first, the calls came often. Sarah would call every Sunday. David would check in every few days. Josh would video call to show her his apartment or share his cooking fails. They all promised the same thing. "You gave us everything, Mom. We'll always take care of you." Those words comforted her, but time has a cruel way of eroding promises. The calls became shorter, less frequent, then missed altogether. Messages went unanswered for days. When she reminded them, gently, she'd get polite excuses. "Work's been insane, the kids have exams, we'll catch up soon." Margaret didn't complain. She reminded herself, they have their own lives now. That's what I raised them for. Then one rainy morning, she slipped in the kitchen. It was a minor fall, but it left her with a fractured wrist and a bruised hip. The pain was nothing compared to the panic that crept in later. She couldn't chop vegetables, open jars, or carry laundry. She couldn't drive. For the first time, the silence in the house felt dangerous. She hesitated, but finally picked up the phone and called David. "Maybe I could come stay with you and Emily for a few weeks. Just until I heal." There was a long pause on the line. Too long. Of course, Mom. It's just, the guest room is being used by Emily's parents next week. But maybe we can make it work, just for a short time." The words, "make it work," rang in her ears long after the call ended. That night, she cried quietly in bed, not from the pain in her bones, but the ache in her heart. Instead of going to David's, she checked into a rehabilitation facility. It wasn't a bad place, clean, professional, efficient, but it wasn't home. For 3 weeks, she lay in that unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling and waiting for someone to visit. Only Sarah sent flowers. "Sorry I couldn't come, Mom. Work's a nightmare. Hope the roses cheer you up." They didn't. When she returned home, she found her mailbox overflowing and her garden full of weeds. The silence that greeted her at the door felt colder than ever. She stood in her living room, surrounded by framed family pictures, and asked herself, where did I go wrong? She'd once believed that loving your children unconditionally meant being available forever, at their beck and call, no questions asked. But now she wasn't sure. Josh invited her over for Christmas. That spark of hope flared again. Maybe this is a turning point, she thought. She packed her best dress, some gifts for the grandchildren, and even baked cookies for Josh's wife. But the visit felt like a formality. The house was loud, but she felt invisible. Meals were rushed. Plans were made without her. She spent most of the time alone in the guest room, watching sitcoms she didn't enjoy. No one asked her how she was feeling. No one offered to take a walk with her or sit down for tea. One evening, as she passed the kitchen, she overheard Josh's wife whispering, "I know she means well, but she just throws everything off. It's stressful having her here." Margaret froze. The words stung more than anything else she had experienced in years. She went back to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the closed door. The next morning, she told Josh she was flying back home early. She didn't tell him what she'd heard. Didn't ask him why he hadn't defended her. She just said she missed her own bed. As she boarded the flight, something inside her changed. It wasn't sadness, not entirely. It was clarity. She remembered a video clip her neighbor had once sent her. A clip of Jordan Peterson saying, "In old age, don't visit your kids if you want to be respected." At the time, Margaret had laughed. How cold, she'd thought. How selfish. Now she understood. When you go to your children seeking comfort, you become vulnerable. When you stay too long, you become a burden. When you need too much, they start to pull away, not out of malice, but out of discomfort. Respect, she realized, comes not from sacrifice, but from strength. So she stopped calling every day. She stopped waiting by the phone. She stopped measuring her worth by how often her children visited. Instead, she went back to something she'd left behind long ago, herself. She signed up for a painting class at the community center, started morning walks in the park and joined a book club. For the first time in decades, Margaret bought something for herself, a small canvas and an oil painting set. She painted wildflowers and seascapes. She laughed with strangers. Something strange began to happen. David started calling, not to check in, but to ask about her paintings. Sarah asked for book recommendations. Josh sent her a picture of his daughter trying to paint like grandma. The less she needed them, the more they wanted to connect. She wasn't angry at them anymore. Just wiser, because she had finally learned the brutal truth. If you want to be respected in old age, stop trying to be loved the way you were when they were small. Build a life they can admire, not pity. And above all, never forget, the most powerful love in your later years is the love you give to yourself. 3 years passed, and Margaret, the once self-sacrificing mother, the one who waited by the phone, who gave until she had nothing left, had transformed. She still lived in the same modest house, with its creaky floorboards and overgrown backyard, but everything inside had changed. The living room now displayed her framed paintings, bold strokes of wild oceans, quiet forests, sunlit fields. Her small bookshelf was overflowing with historical fiction and philosophy. There was always a kettle warm on the stove and fresh cookies in the jar, not for guests, but for herself. The loneliness that once haunted the walls had faded. In its place was something deeper. Not joy, exactly, but peace. She was no longer chasing the past or begging to be remembered. And ironically, that's when her children started returning. It began with Sarah. She called one evening after months of silence, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Hi Mom, I saw your painting online, the seascape with the lighthouse. A friend of mine shared it. I didn't even know you were painting again." Margaret smiled. "I never really stopped, just forgot for a while." They talked for an hour. Not about aches or aging, not about regrets or expectations, but about books, color palettes, and a new cafe that hosted open mic nights. Next came David. He sent a voice message one morning, something he'd never done before. "Hey, Mom, I was thinking about you today. Remember that quote you used to tell us, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans? I finally get it. Emily and I, we're slowing down. I miss those long talks with you. Want to visit for the weekend?" She didn't answer right away. She stared at the message for several minutes. Then typed, "Thank you for the invitation. But I've got plans with my art group this weekend. Maybe another time." She held her breath as she hit send. But the reply came almost instantly. "Fair enough, let me know when you're free. Proud of you, Mom." And then, surprisingly, Josh called. Not a rushed, distracted call like before, but a genuine one. "Mom, guess what? Lily wants to paint like Grandma. She's even using words like contrast and composition." Where did she learn that? Margaret laughed. From watching someone who finally learned to live for herself. At the next family gathering, a picnic organized at Margaret's insistence in her town's botanical garden, things felt different. Gone were the tense, obligatory hugs and distracted glances. Her children were curious about her life. They asked about her classes, her books, her garden. The grandchildren gathered around her as she painted a simple watercolor of daisies and bees. Sarah pulled her aside during lunch. "You look happy, Mom. Truly, what changed?" Margaret looked out at the children playing on the grass. "I did," she said. "I stopped expecting my worth to come from you three." Sarah looked stunned, even hurt. "We never meant to make you feel like you weren't important." Margaret reached over and touched her hand. "I know, and I don't blame you. But I forgot to teach you one very important thing, that I'm a person, too. Not just a mother." There was a long pause between them. Then Sarah whispered, "I wish I had noticed sooner." Margaret smiled gently. "We all grow when we're ready." That night, back at her home, she sat on the porch sipping tea when David came out quietly. "I still remember the time you stayed up with me the night before my first big test. I was a wreck, crying over math formulas, and you just made it all feel okay. I remember, she nodded, amused. You fell asleep on your textbook. David chuckled, then turned serious. Mom, you were always there for us. I think we took that for granted. We just assumed you'd be there forever. Never asked what you needed. I'm sorry. She didn't need an apology. She wasn't angry anymore, but something about hearing it healed a small piece inside her anyway. Thank you, she said softly. Weeks passed. Margaret received more invitations than she could accept. Her children wanted her to visit, to help with the grandkids, to come stay for holidays. She accepted some, declined others, not out of spite, but because her calendar was full, with her own life. Her painting club was holding an exhibition. She was helping a friend set up a charity auction. There were new recipes to try, new paths in the park to explore, and an Italian documentary series she'd just started. One day, Josh offered something unexpected. We've been thinking, Mom, what if we build you a guest house?